Hello and welcome. I'm Allison Venuto, and I'm one of the board members of American Pilgrims on the Camino. We are really grateful for your time here today. And as we get started, we are going to talk today about a cycling pilgrimage, an alternative to walking. So we're grateful to have three different folks here talking. We may have another person join us as well, but we are going to hear from different perspectives from our panelists today. And those panelists, I'm going to introduce them to you. We have Bill Arts, who is also one of our board members of American Pilgrims on the Camino. And in addition to cycling the Camino Frances in 2015, he's walked the Frances from Leon and is planning to walk the Camino Portuguese coastal route in May. He currently serves as the treasurer of American Pilgrims on the Camino, so we're grateful for him and his time here today. We also have Brian Heron, who has cycled two personal pilgrimage routes, a 4,000-mile journey through the Western U.S., revisiting all the places he has lived, and a 3,000-kilometer cycling pilgrimage that he called the Rome to Rumi. He walked the Camino Frances in 2023, and his first pilgrimage is captured in a book called Alone, a 4,000-mile search for belonging. Our next panelist we have is Lila Lazarus, and she is a top contributor to American Pilgrims on the Camino cycling group, recently cycled the Camino Frances, and one more thing, just a second. She is a former news anchor, health reporter, yoga instructor, extreme athlete, and avid adventure seeker. She inspires people to not only embrace life, but just grab it by the horns and take it for a wild ride. She is a global explorer and a keynote speaker who passionately advocates for the transformative power of play, adventure, and novelty to boost both employee and life engagement to new heights. So with that, we are really grateful to have our panelists here today. Unfortunately, yes, go ahead,
Allison,
Bill.
Mike's here. Mike, exquisite timing. So
thank you so much.
As my alternate ego. He's on. His name is Bill Arts too. So there's two.
Perfect, Bill. You're very famous. So we also have Mike Wells here, and he lives in London. He's a prolific author and author of walking and cycling guidebooks, mostly published by Cicerone Press. He has cycled the Camino Frances 4 times. The first in 1996 when it was relatively unknown, and plans to make his 5th trip this September. As he recently passed his 75th birthday, he intends to do this ride on an electrically assisted bike. He has also ridden the Via De La Plata from Sevilla to Astorga. So we are grateful to have all 4 of our panelists here. Unfortunately, we were not able to have Sandy Brown with us today, who is also one of our wonderful volunteers with American Pilgrims. Bill, do you want to talk a little bit about Sandy's contributions, and I'll share my screen so we can see what he sent as well.
Yeah, so Sandy had played actually a really important part in this today's event, both in terms of contributing some questions, but also in kind of I pulled this from a presentation I did at last year's annual gathering. So I thought it's really a helpful tool, insightful tool to kind of approaching things, especially cycling a Camino. And he, basically Sandy's. He's a partner with Mike, and they both are guide writers. So and both of them are really great at that. And in terms of Sandy's tips, though, here's the page kind of shows you what some of the important things are. And I think for me, the one things that I want to point out just in general, it would be safety first. Always try to maintain control of your bike. I think that's something that is infamous, especially particularly on the Frances, where there seems to be some animosity among riders and between riders and walkers. And so what Sandy's approach to that is that it's about awareness and making people aware that the Camino is a multimodal path. That's spelt wrong. And it's basically consists of various types of people that are doing their Camino. So basically be courteous when you encounter others along the way. Certainly it's something that everybody appreciates. So, and then basically has some simple tips around planning the day, and just be careful out there in terms of where you ride. For example, if going up to descent after Alto del Perdón or El Sobrero, you have to be really careful there, and maybe you should consider coming down or up by the road. And then just some packing tips. Just basically the idea there is to pack lights, same as you would with if you're walking. But just know that it's nice to have it on the way down, but it's certainly harder on the way up when you're heavier. And then we broached the topic of e-bikes and all those things that go with that. And one of the things is that you have to be mindful of, if you are going to e-bike, is you have to be mindful of the range of the battery, and depending how much you rely on the battery to pedal or not pedal, and particularly where it's level or flat or uphill or downhill. So you must be mindful of how much battery power you have, because they're very heavy bikes and you don't want to be carrying up a hill.
All right. Thanks, Bill. And we're really grateful for Sandy and all his contributions. And I know he was instrumental in the group's preparations for today and everything that he does for American Pilgrims. So we're grateful to him. The first question to the panelists for today is, what were your motivations to do a pilgrimage by bicycle?
Anybody want to go first?
I'll go ahead and step in on that one. My first one is in 2011. And this is one of the reasons I really love pilgrimage, is that it's a chance to work through whatever it is that might be going on in your life. I often think of pilgrimages as a way of crossing a threshold. And in 2011, I just had a number of things that came together over about a 3 or 4 year period. I had a divorce, and then a mother-in-law that I was very close to who died, a stepmother who then died shortly after that. And my work was closing a church. So I was living and breathing and eating, dreaming grief all the time. And I knew in the process of getting ready to close a church that also meant I had an unknown future. And so I developed this pilgrimage through the West, where I revisited all the towns I'd lived in, just as a way to get back in touch with my past, my background, my people, geography, to have a better sense of where I need to go in the future. So very much a personal kind of motivation to cross a threshold in my life.
Mike or
Anybody?
Lila? You're on mute.
You're on mute.
It's Lila. I'm an adventure seeker by nature, and I had been told probably a dozen years ago that I had to do the Camino. I'm one of those believers, and I'm sure you've heard it, that you don't choose the Camino chooses you. And it never left my mind. I don't know anyone who had done it by bike. I hadn't met anyone that had ever even thought about doing it by bike. And I certainly had never ridden 30 to 50 miles a day for 2 weeks. But who has 2 weeks? I mean, who has 5 weeks or 4 weeks to walk 500 miles? And so I explored doing it by mule or by horse. And then it occurred to me, well, maybe I could do it by bike, and then started looking at other groups that had ridden by bike. And I decided to do it completely solo. And I flew to Paris, to Biarritz, took a taxi to Bayonne, got on a bus to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. I rented a bike. It was actually waiting for me at the hotel that I stayed in, and started my adventure the next morning, probably more alive and more excited than I'd ever been in my life. And I did the Camino for adventure, but it turned into such a pilgrimage. It turned into my life's most powerful 2 weeks, changing me, transforming me. I mean, if you want your life to be different, you got to do something different. And certainly this was so different. I found out that you're stronger than you think. You're more powerful than you know. I thought that I would be afraid, but it actually helped me play with fear. I would just keep fear in the back seat and keep moving forward. And I was so exhilarated and so excited. And again, felt just so powerful. I went out of my way to meet people. I think obviously you meet more people when you're walking because you have more time to talk. And I'm sure we can talk about that in a moment. But I was able to meet so many wonderful people, even by biking.
Mike? Damn you, maybe. Yeah, I think.
Maybe he's having some technical problems.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill, did you want to answer that one? If not, I'll scoot to the next question.
And mine's similar to Lila's. I basically, it was a time issue for me because I work full time. So I have other competition for that time. So for me, biking was probably the only way I would be able to do it if I wanted to do some of a certain length. So, but similar to Lila, I had the same kinds of experiences, I think. So.
Great.
Can I comment on one thing that Lila said? That I
Of
love your
course.
comment to play with fear. That's one of the things I've discovered about pilgrimages is that all kinds of emotions and things will come up, things that we often steer away from. And I think that's the right word, is that you learn to sort of be playful with uncertainty, fear, anxiety. Yeah, thank you for capturing that with those words, Lila.
Thanks. I loved every second of it. I even like welcomed the fear, and I loved practicing welcoming fear. And because it just made everything, I almost looked for the fear so that I could just practice going through it. And it just made it a whole lot more fun.
It's beautiful. Thank you. So pilgrimage is sometimes a solitary journey, especially for cyclists where relationships with walkers typically last only briefly since they go at a slower pace. Is that truly an issue? And if so, how do you suggest combating it? Did you connect with other pilgrims, and how did you connect with them?
So I'll start off, my favorite thing is to meet people in my travels. So I instantly realized, oops, I may have made a mistake. I'm on a bike, I'm solo, I'm whizzing by these people. So at night, I would go out of my way at the auberge or wherever I was staying to make sure that I was meeting people. And then I would leave after them so that they were well on their journey and then I could catch up to them. I went out of my way to stop on my bike, get off. And every day I tried to walk at least 1 mile with somebody talking to them. And then if I ever got into an issue, like that first day on the going up the Pyrenees, man, on the Napoleon, there's no way to get over the Napoleon unless somebody's helping you get over the rocks with your bike. So it was easy to meet people when you're asking them for help. And or if I was on just a really hard uphill and there were rocks, I had these little old, I swear they were in their 80s, little old Italian women helping me push. And those are the magic moments, is when you're meeting people, but you really have to go out of your way to do that. It is the downside of doing it by bike, but also the upside, because I had never been alone for 2 weeks. And that was probably also the most powerful part of this journey, was spending that kind of time alone. I think it's so cathartic and so powerful.
I can't really speak to the solitude and connection by bike on the Camino because I walked mine, but I've done solitary journeys on the bike. And one of the things I noticed in walking the Camino, which I think probably this probably applies also to biking, but what I noticed is I had to really listen to myself. And there were times when I needed solitude, and I would have 3 or 4 days where I would have very little connection intentionally. It was like I just need to kind of be in my heart and soul. And then I had other times where I spent 3 or 4 days in a row walking with a group. We stayed together places, and it was this this movement. And a lot of it was just, it wasn't so much by chance as much as it was listening to what I needed in that process.
And for me, it is a solitary experience. I don't think you can get around it. It's particularly relative to people that are walking. However, there are other bicyclists, and I did manage to meet one person that I connected with toward the end of the Frances, and we hung out together for about 4 or 5 days. And he spoke Spanish. He was from Barcelona. My culinary experience went up about 100-fold. So it was actually pretty good. And actually, the Camino provides. I was waning, I think, toward the end of it, and having the camaraderie of riding with someone really helped me kind of finish it off. It kind of gave me that extra little incentive. So I enjoyed the solitary time. I think the Camino was something that I needed to do in that regard for that time space, but also having the camaraderie of meeting people. And I particularly tried to stay in albergues because I knew I would meet people at night. And I did make connections that way. And so you have to, like Lila said, you have to kind of look out for, you have to be conscious of making the effort to do it, but it is a different experience. And you think you need some time alone, I certainly recommend it.
All right. Now I'm going to move into some logistics questions here. How did you plan? What did you bring with you? Would you plan or do anything differently than what y'all did?
I definitely wouldn't bring my computer. It was just too, it was too big and too bulky. You don't need anything. You really don't need to bring. And anything you need to buy is available. And you're going to be a lot happier with less than you are with more. I did book every single hotel ahead of time. If I did it again, I wouldn't do that. But for my first time, I'm glad that I did because I was scared. It was fear that made me book all those hotel rooms. I wanted to know that somebody knew I was coming, and I wanted to know that somebody would know if I didn't show up as a female alone. Now I realize that really wasn't necessary, but I didn't know that. I think in the summertime, it's probably necessary because it just makes it easier. You're not worried about where you're going. But I did it in October, and there would have been plenty of openings wherever I had gone. But I also loved that I got to see the hotel room ahead of time and choose some nice ones.
Brian?
Yeah, I think I can echo quite a bit of that. I think most of us, especially during our first one, we overplan, we overpack to make sure everything is taken care of. And there's actually sites on the Camino where there's lots and lots of gear there because people are shedding. After the first day or two, they're starting to shed their stuff, realizing, oh my gosh, I don't want to carry this much weight. I don't need all this. And I think what Lila said is true, that even if you underpack a little bit, which is unlikely for most of us, but even if you do, you're going to be able to find the 2 or 3 things that you need. And I noticed when I walked the Camino this time, I packed pretty well, but I've also done 3 of these before. But I did find one spot where things were colder than I expected, and so I bought a hat and some gloves, and and I could have carried those for 4 weeks and then bought them, or I could have bought them, when I needed them. So.
I totally thought that I would need my headset as an example, that I definitely need earphones because I'd be listening to so many books that I downloaded. I never turned it on one time.
So I know there's people in this audience that know me, and they're going to laugh because I'm a spreadsheet pilgrim. So, and that would not be surprising to most of the people some of the people that know me. So like, I totally planned ahead of time. I totally plan. I mean, I had everything planned out. I did every angle, everything you could think of. Now I didn't book ahead except for the first day. Obviously, I wanted to stay in Roncesvalles. So, and also in St. John, Pier de Port. There's I forget the name of the albergue, but there's a nice place to stay there. So I did book a couple days. And I did take a couple days in a hotel just because you need a day to kind of be by yourself after being in albergues all the time, right? Everybody, you kind of learn that. So, but I did plan it out the door in terms of just everything, and tried to pack light, but obviously overpacked. And Sandy Brown is my hero because I talked to him last year about this, and he takes a 15-liter laptop bag, and that's all he has. And he has very minimal. He's very light, and he's my hero. He's awesome. He's a guy you have to emulate because he does know how to do it, and he writes, and so he's got all that other stuff he's got to deal with. So he's amazing. I think his approach is amazing to me. So
That's my new goal.
yeah.
I'm going to bring in a couple of logistics questions that came in the chat as I ask this next question. Somebody's asking, have you ever partnered with a walker? So kind of having a mixed group. So some walkers, some bikers. So if you guys could speak to those logistics. And then also if y'all could speak to the percentage of albergues or pensiones that allow bikes and how that works.
Good question.
I found every single hotel, every auberge. I mean, all albergue. They were so welcoming with the bike. They had special places to park the bike. They were just wonderful. But that's in October. I have a feeling it's probably different in the summertime. I just thought people were so wonderful and so welcoming everywhere I went.
I didn't encounter any issues when I did this back in 2014 or whatever. It may change now just because of volume, particularly on the Frances. You may have a little bit more of a competition, but I didn't find. I think if there was a completo, I found another place. Whether it was if that night, then maybe I stayed in a refugio or did something, but there was always something that was available. I think I got the last bed in I forget Colorado because I had talked to a guy I met and everything was complete except for the parish albergue, and actually that was a pretty cool place to stay. It was actually kind of fun to stay there. So it all works out, right? And I didn't encounter any to come back later or anything like that. So it was pretty easy. And I don't think people should be too anxious about that at all. I mean, there's always place. You can always find a place. Always.
I do want people to know, I mean, when you say you're riding the Camino, you're also walking the Camino because there's so many hills that you're not going to be able to ride up unless you have that e-bike. And I would curse those e-bikes when they passed me by because, man, was I pushing and pushing to get up those hills. But at the same time, the downhills are so much more fun on a bike than they are walking. And those downhills are like no other downhills you've ever done in your life. And they're spectacular. And it's so exhilarating. And I don't know how it was for you guys, but I know for me, the first time I did one of those major downhills, I was on the brakes the whole time. I never let go of the brakes. And then at 2 or 3 hills in, you don't even touch the brakes. You're just taking it and you're flying. And it's just it's better than the best amusement park. It was so amazing. Such a feeling of freedom.
Absolutely.
So the next question I have is about logistics related to the bike itself. So
Well,
any
Allison, there was one question that we didn't address was the walk
okay.
jointly.
Oh yes, walking with the person who's walking and person who's biking.
Yeah, so let's touch on that just a bit. I didn't have that experience where it was that kind of rotation where you have to kind of want to work that way about it, but certainly all it means is that you're going to slow your pace down to keep depending on how often you want to reconnect, right? I mean, if it's every day, obviously you're only going to be you're riding a lot less time, so you're going to have a lot more time to spend hanging out wherever you're going to stop for the night. Or if you decide you're going to do like a weekly touch point, then you can kind of go and have a couple days rest, whatever, so it's possible to do it. It's just a matter of coordination between the people that are doing it, the groups, whether it's in groups of people or individually as a pair.
Yeah, and having done both cycling pilgrimages and walking pilgrimages, I would agree with Bill that it's possible, but I would say it's unlikely. The experiences are just so different that when I've done cycling pilgrimages, I generally average between 60 and 65 miles a day. Well, that's on paved roads, a lot less probably on much of the Camino. And then when I walk, I was averaging 14 miles a day. So you certainly could do it for a portion, but it would be.
And here's another thought, because I will say this, and maybe some people that are cyclists may not agree with me, but it is easier to cycle the Camino than walk it. Okay, that's my opinion. Some people may argue with you. So if someone who is having a harder time walking for whatever reason, whether it's blisters or even just a physical challenge, that might be a way for that person to do the Camino with someone that has a better capacity to walk. So they just go at a slower pace. So, but it's easier for them because they're having that kind of challenge. So that's something to consider if that's the case where you have someone that is to be able to do it in that way. It may make it easier for them to do it. It's just a tool basically at that point.
The other thing I'd say about the difference between the cycling pilgrimage and the walking pilgrimage is, walking, you tend to go pretty much the same pace, whether you're going uphill or downhill. So it really lends itself to a lot of reflection. And I think you can definitely get some of that cycling as well, depending on the terrain, but it's a lot more technical. So the one thing you get with the cycling, you do get more thrill. As Lila was saying, there's those times when you're flying down a hill and you just don't get that when you're walking. But you do get a lot of time for reflection. So they're two different experiences, and just think about what you need more.
And you have a choice every single day. I want to answer some of these questions. Yes, e-bikes are just as welcome as regular bikes. And I saw people charging their charge pack things at every hotel or whatever that I went to. In terms of what bike, I had a mountain bike, and it was great. I'm glad I did. I just rented whatever they gave me, and thank goodness it worked out. And that's kind of the attitude you have to take no matter what on the Camino. Just know it's always going to work out. And I worried about every last thing. And it turned out I had nothing to worry about. And even when there were those few moments, and you will have these moments where you're like, wait, do I turn this way or that way? Because as well marked as the Camino is, there's always these moments where you're like, wait, which one's my way? And I said to myself, either I'm going to go the right way or I'm going to learn something. And sometimes I learned something. And that was still just part of the adventure. It's all about the attitude that you take. There was one other question I wanted to add. Oh, somebody asked about what maps you take or whatever. So on the bike, it's just so easy to have your phone right there on your handlebars. And I started out using Google Maps. Don't do that. Google Maps took me into fields, pricker bushes. Like I have no idea. I think the maps must have still been from the Roman times. But I switched over to Apple and those maps were perfect. So I didn't need any guidebooks or anything. That's the other thing I took that I didn't need to take. I had so many guidebooks that I didn't have to open because Apple Maps were fine on my handlebars. And also, when you spend so much time reading, you don't spend a lot of time observing and being part of wherever you are. So at lunch, I would read and read and read, and then realize I just missed this whole lunch because I was spending the whole time reading. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks. So I'm going to ask a few more questions about the logistics of the bike itself. Using your bike, or did you guys rent bikes? Did you bring them from the US or get them when you were there? What were the factors in your decision? How did you transport it if it came from the US with you? Did you encounter any difficulties with that? And can you speak a little bit to the cost of any of that as well?
I'll take that one. For me, it was renting. I had actually thought about because I had actually started the my Camino in Lourdes, and so I thought about riding from Lourdes, but it became too much of a challenge in terms of you can't cross the border with a bike. You have to rent 2 separate transactions. So I gave up on the biking part for France, and trained down. But I did rent it. I didn't really think it was a factor for me to basically transport my bike. I thought it would be more of a hassle. And then plus, I think the main advantage for renting is that you have a support service that you can call to if something goes wrong. I had a few times where I had broken spokes. And at one point, I went into there was a shop in Sahagún, and I went into it wasn't really a bike shop, but it was like kind of a general repair shop. And went in there and used my Google Translate to tell them I had a broken spoke. And no, senor, we don't do this. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to necessarily go on. So I called the bike company and they talked to the person in Spanish and they were able to help me out and fix the bike. Didn't do a very good job, to be honest with you. But after I stopped in a store and there was a actual bike shop there, and the guy did a better job fixing it, and I didn't have any problems after that. So those, I think, are, for me, from experience, that's why I would rent, is that you have that's the primary reason, the backbone of having the support in case something happens, because shit happens, excuse my French, but it happens, right? I mean, something happens. And I met a guy from South Africa who had gone through about 5 or 6 broken spokes. So I after I met him, I didn't feel so bad about having to deal with that. But and people encounter other things too, right? So you just have to be ready. I think that's a good way to protect yourself, especially if you're in a different country and that kind of thing. So
I wasn't trying to set any world records. I just wanted to get to Santiago. That was my prayer, that I would get there by the end. And so if I had wanted to set a record or, do it in under 10 days or something crazy, I would have taken my own road bike. But I didn't want that. I wanted to experience every day and take it as it comes. And so I rented a mountain bike. And again, just what you said, the companies are so helpful. And I actually asked them, hey, if I want to do 30 to 50 miles a day, which city should I go to? And I got recommendations on which hotels and all of that. And that just made it a lot easier for me. I had a big fear. I don't know how to change a tire. I still don't know how to change a tire. And I knew that if something bad happened, I was going to have to rely on the kindness of strangers. And but it's the Camino, and you will have the kindness of strangers. Unfortunately, at one point I was in some field. There wasn't anybody for miles. It was raining and my chain came off. And I'm like, darn it, this is my biggest fear. But you'll find that in those moments you have Herculean strength and knowledge. And I just turned the bike over, fixed it, wiped my hands off and moved forward. And so I think that you just have to take each part as part of the adventure. And you don't need some incredible bike unless you're in need of an e-bike. And I'm a 60-year-old female who's less than 5 foot. I mean, I did it without an e-bike, and I think if I can, you can.
I think the piece that I can add to this, especially what Bill talks about things happen. And I think my experience is unusual, but it's probably important for you to hear it. The other reason to rent a bike is getting your bike there may not be dependable. So I've done 2 international trips. The one was the Rome to Rumi, where I was flying into Rome. And I cycled a lot, so I really wanted my bike, because I'm all fitted for it and all that kind of stuff. And my bike didn't arrive for 4 days. And the timing actually was okay because I had about 4 days in Rome before taking off. So, but still, I didn't know if it was going to get there, when it was going to get there. So that was 4 days late. And then I did a cycling trip to Everest 6 years ago, and my bike never got there in time. So those are the only 2 times I've done this, and both times it didn't work out. So I'm pretty sure this is unusual, but I was batting 1,000.
Okay. I'm going to take a question from the chat. It says,
one more thing, Alice, on the renting
yep.
the bike thing. Just a thought. Now, when you rent the bike, Lila, I don't know if you had this experience, but I had mine delivered to Rentas Vias, so it comes unassembled. So you have to actually put your pedals on and put the handlebars on, and so it's minimal amount of work. It's really simple, but there is some assembly required, just so people know. And the bike company will help you with that in terms of if you're anxious about it.
So you didn't have the experience then of riding up across the Pyrenees.
No, I didn't do that.
So my bike was waiting for me at my hotel in Saint Jean Pied de Port, and it was probably 2 sizes too big for me, even though I had emphasized how short I am and that I won't be able to ride a big bike. And I didn't have that extra day to wait and have somebody. So I rode a bike that was just too big for me. And but that just made it, more part of the journey and a story to tell. I remember getting on going, I'm scared. This feels awful. I like my bike at home, and this is nothing like my bike at home. But it's amazing how quickly humans can adjust when they want to.
Thank you. So can y'all speak to the roads? Were you generally on a road, off road? Can you speak a little bit to that? And I have a question. Is it marked differently somehow what roads y'all take versus what walkers take?
No, because if you want, you can stay on the Camino the entire time, but it's bumpy, it's rocky, there are difficult moments. And if it's and especially in that last 100 miles when it gets crowded, I just felt like I was an inconvenience and a annoyance. And I never wanted to bother the Peregrinos. So nearly, I would say 90% of the Camino has a road next to it. And whenever I could be on that road as opposed to the Camino, I tried to do that if there were pilgrims around, just so that nobody's bumping into each other. Because every time you ride by them, you're surprising them, especially if they have headphones on, somewhere on the telephone, and the different ways people do the Camino for whatever reason. But I did have a really cute bell, ding, 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 on my bike that I used as much as I could so that I wasn't surprising people. And that made them smile as opposed to a sudden sound or, annoying honk or whatever. And people were very kind. It was always buen camino.
I think this question speaks to something that was brought up earlier on Sandy Brown's tips, and that there's some portions of the Frances, at least, and I'm sure other areas where you just don't want to ride down or do it by bicycle. So I would definitely consider, obviously taking the road in those circumstances. Speaking from my own experience, I did both. And I did not, especially, and I wouldn't have wanted to have missed the downhill from Osabrero. And relative to walking down it once and riding, you have a way more thrilling time going downhill from Osabrero, because it's probably the best day of your life. It's a nice day, and you like to cycle, versus coming down and having to walk down your bike on that shale and different types of things. So Sandy's right. That's probably in your planning stage. That's something that you really kind of should hone in on and say, okay, here's what that's kind of, and as you go and you learn as you go, because you can't plan for everything, right? So at least that's my experience. And so then you just decide, okay, and there were places where I did have to walk my bike because like, I did this and why did I do that? And I wound up having to get off of it. So I kind of just became more flexible and not bothered by the fact that I wasn't going to be on the path with all the walking pilgrims or everybody else. It's just that I was going to be on the road. And to go to one last thing, and Allison's questions about markings, I didn't find any issues with the yellow arrows are on the road. You can look down, particularly when we're talking about the Camino, they're there. And so I made a couple wrong turns, but between just understanding the mapping and basically looking for the next arrow if it's a while before you see one, they're like, well, maybe I ought to think about where I'm at and take a gander, kind of triangulating where I'm supposed to be in the world. So that's something else that, yeah, it's pretty well marked, at least the Frances. I haven't experienced any others, and people that have cycled other routes may have different experiences with that, but I know the Frances is fairly well marked on the road.
And
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Go ahead, Brian.
Also doing the Camino Frances. Yeah, very well marked. And a couple things I noticed that occasionally there were sections where it really was reserved for the peregrinos and the cyclists, but there would be different signs to say, cyclists go to the left, peregrinos go to the right. The other thing I was going to say, what Lila talked about with the bell, as one who walked it, that's very helpful. I think my sense with the experience of the peregrinos, they often get into just a real reflective place. They get into their head and their heart. And if somebody comes up real fast on it, it does surprise them because it's almost prayerful, it's like they're that place. And hearing the bell, 20 seconds or 10 seconds ahead of time, it's like, oh, okay, and the other thing, because the peregrinos will oftentimes see anywhere from maybe 2 cyclists to maybe 20 cyclists in the day. It's very different than when you're on a bike walking path in a city where you're sharing all the time and you notice stay to the right. Well, if you're only seeing 7 in a day, the walkers, they're moving around on the path, so they're not necessarily always making room for the cyclists because they may only see them every couple of hours. So just a nice, quick, kind warning is helpful.
Thank you. I do want to say there's some great resources in the chat too. So just wanted to thank those of you who are posting information in there. That's very helpful. Bill, you kind of touched on the fact that you had done the Frances. There's a question in here. Has anybody cycled the Via De La Plata, and would that be a good one to potentially cycle? Oh, it looks like one of our attendees has.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I did the Via De La Plata on a bike on a recumbent, and the beauty of it is that whole road is an old Roman road, an old trade zone that's been there for thousands of years. So the Spanish built, a road there, and then 10 or 15 years ago, they built a freeway right near it. So now the state road is almost free of bikes and free of cars. So you have it all to yourself. It's extremely safe. The grades aren't too bad. And it's just a great route to take.
That's a great point on the Frances too, because that's the same thing where there's the Autopista. They're the local road or state road is N120. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's devoid of traffic. When you're in up between cities, it's awesome because there's nobody on it, and there's a wide, at least where I was, it's a really wide path, on the side to plenty of room for 2 bicyclists to ride alongside each other if you're riding in a group, or by yourself. So there's leeway between where the car's passing you and where you're at on the side of the road. So it's a nice thing.
Bill, we got a follow-up question about when the bike is delivered to you, does it come with tools and things like that in order to set up? And I guess, well, Lila, the same for you. I guess it came to you too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can get a toolbox. Yeah, you get a basic set of tools to change the tire. I brought my own, to be honest with you. I have my own just tool set that I had, a small one, right, with multi-tool that I carried with me in my, and I actually used the bike bag. So I put everything in there, like my credential and my everything that went into the front of the bag. So I use that as a kind of way to carry things. But yeah, it comes with they give you a toolkit with a change of tire, basic kit to do that. And like I said, so there's other tools if you know how to do other things with the bike. But basically, I think the one biggest thing is a flat tire. And the chain is another one that comes off, but I didn't have that problem. My only problem with it was my own stupidity. They, one of the things that they recommend is that when you're going downhill, and I had, to basically make sure you cool off your brakes, right? So you don't want to get them too hot. And so you should stop periodically. Well, how do you figure out if they're cooled off or not? So you do touch the oven, kind of touch your hand to the flame, and you realize that that's not the way to check if they're too hot. You get an instant blister on the ceramic dial. So don't do that. I would caution you to do that. But
Good advice.
but think about how when you're going downhill, if you're riding the brakes really hard, that stop and just take a half hour or whatever, 20 minutes or 15 minutes even to have your drink, and just let the brakes cool off so that you're not having a problem finding out that they quit on you in a critical point of time.
Thank you. And Jerry, we had a follow-up question for you. Did you ever use the hiking trail as you were on the La Plata?
Maybe once, but I like smooth roads. I'm more of a road biker. So I've biked all over Europe and Spain, and three Caminos. So give me nice pavement.
Thank you. I do want to say that panelists, just so you know that I have the questions, but you guys have touched on several of them, so I'm kind of skipping a few of them. In terms of storage and locking your bike, can you guys speak to that and how that worked when you're at an albergue, a pension, a casa rural, or whatever you guys did for the nights?
I slightly touched on that, but every single place that I went to has a designated place for a bike. And sometimes it's a storage closet, sometimes it's a barn. And it was very, very, very safe. I wanted to touch on this really quick, and that is, if I could speak to my pre-Camino self, I would tell her, stop worrying. There's nothing, you worry and you fear about so many things, and none of it comes true. I was always afraid of forgetting something, losing my passport, whatever. And so the other thing I would tell my pre-Camino self is have a system for everything, know where you're keeping everything, where you're putting everything, know that all of the albergues have done this before. Yes, there are places for your bike. Oh, I did make a mistake. One of the hotels, it's almost like a parking lot, like a public parking lot, where they have you lock up your bike. And even though it's got an iron gate that closes at night, there are other cars and people that go in and out of there. And I left my phone holder on the bike, and it wasn't there. It was my own stupidity. It wasn't there when I went in the morning. But that's the only time I experienced something like that. Generally speaking, everything was kept in a very safe place.
I forgot to bring a lock, and I didn't buy a lock for I don't know what reason why I didn't. And so I had a little anxiety about, not so much when I went to stop overnight in the albergues or wherever I was, because I always had a place for it. It was just during the day if I wanted to do some kind of touring, some kind of visit to a cathedral or whatever. I always had a little bit of anxiety about leaving it, but I never had a problem. The only time was one time in Sahagún. I was sitting there and I was worried about someone kind of eyeing I had my bag open and I was sitting away from my bike and I was watching this person. And I thought maybe that they'd make a jump for, but it was just my own fear. They had no intention of doing anything. So I think it's pretty safe, but I would recommend bringing a lock.
Did your rental company not give you a lock?
Yeah, I didn't have a lock. Yeah. So
huh. My bike came with a lock.
It's nice. They must have maybe forgotten it, but yeah, that's one thing I would recommend to not necessarily, not that you don't trust people, but it's just it's a precaution issue. So you don't wind up with no bike.
But most of the companies do give you a lock for sure.
I was just going to say that being on the Camino, the people who are there for a different reason. So taking other people's belongings is not too much of an issue. But I agree with Bill, especially when you get into going through some of the towns or cities. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of anxiety, but I lost my 2 poles toward the end as a walker. Somebody quote borrowed them, so it does happen.
Did y'all have your own helmets as you rode?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I brought mine.
Okay. And how long in terms of sorry, and panelists, so that you know, I'm done with your questions and now I'm moving into ones that you're getting from the group. But if you have other things to add, please jump in with those. How long in time, hours, did you guys spend cycling? And when did your cycling day end? Can you guys kind of talk to that a little bit?
Every day was a little bit different. I liked not rushing out when the walkers were rushing out, because I knew I didn't have to. If you know, and I went everywhere from 30 to 50 miles every day. So definitely on a 30-mile day, I would leave a little later. But usually I do around 4 hours a day. And there was only that one day at, what's it called, Cabrera, that was a killer day, and I wanted to die. And you know, I kept looking up and it never ended. And it was raining and sleeting and a little bit of snow. And so that felt like a super long day. My goal every day was just to get to where I was going before it got dark. And I wasn't sure I was going to make it that day. But thank goodness for that downhill and all of that. But usually I try to do 4 hours. My longest day was 8 hours.
Well, I just want to mention Mike was able to join us. Mike Wells, he's on the call now, so we fortunately have Mike with us. So, welcome, Mike. Glad you resolved technical issues or whatever. However,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes.
I can't see myself and I can't see you, but should I?
And we can see you though. So anyway, talking about
when does the meeting start? I thought it started at 6 o'clock.
We started, I don't know, about 20, 30 minutes ago, maybe 40 minutes ago. So we started at 11 Central. So
11, because your email said 12 Central and you sent it to me.
I thought it was, I said it was in the message center. I'm sorry for the confusion, I guess. Apologize for that. We were on
the number of hours.
Oh, number of hours?
Yeah. I tended to do about 7 hours per day, but I also would listen to my body, and I'd have days where it's like, yeah, 4 or 5 hours is going to be it. Just take a little break. And then other days I could feel the ambition and do 8. But I tended to want to get into wherever I was going to stay by about 2. That would give me time to get settled in, do that daily wash, get some food, massage my legs, all that stuff. So, but I enjoy a good push. So 7 hours was fun for me.
And the earlier you get in, the more you get to see of the village you arrive in. So that was important.
Yeah, Mike, how about you, Mike? What's your kind of day
I
like?
often tend to split my days. So I'll do maybe from 8 in the morning until 1 o'clock, and then have maybe 2 to 3 hours sitting out of the sun, and then go again around 3:30, 4 o'clock for another 2 hours. It all depends on where you are. And if there's somewhere else to go on to it. If there isn't, when you get there late lunchtime, stop then. I mean, that's what the walkers tend to do. The walkers all tend to end around 2 o'clock. Whereas with a cycle, you can actually go on in the afternoon and find the tracks much more open, much more empty. Many few walkers, and you can cycle for hours in the afternoon and see no one walking.
Mike, can you speak to what Caminos you've biked?
I've done the Frances 4 times now, and I'm due to do it again this September. I've done the Ruta de la Plata, and I've done a very small section of the Norte, but only like 50 kilometers of it. But basically, it's the Frances I'm most experienced on.
Great. I want to open it up to questions from the group, and you guys have been great putting them in the chat thus far. But if you want to put the question in the chat, you're welcome to, or if you want to unmute yourself and speak, that's okay too. But we do have a few minutes for that. So I want to turn that over.
Questions?
I know that prior to this, you guys were asking me as a female alone, did I ever feel like I was in danger? And I thought, again, if I were to speak to my pre-Camino self, I would say, stop worrying. Mostly because you're on the Camino. I don't think you could feel as safe on any other bike ride in the world as you can with the people that you're dealing with, the pilgrims and the villages that you're going through on the Camino. I felt extremely safe, extremely, there was never a time where I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in danger here. So yeah, I think that was a really good experience.
So there's a question in the chat about what sections of the Frances they wouldn't necessarily bike. And I know, based on what the tips from Sandy, one of them was I think the descent from Alto del Perdón.
Yeah.
And then the other one, what else? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike. You can
I
probably.
certainly wouldn't cycle the route de Perdón out of Saint-Jean up to Roncesvalles. I would definitely not do the Napoleon route.
I did it.
Yeah, I know, madness in my view. I mean,
I did. And in fact, a farmer tried to stop me. As I was going up, a farmer tried to stop me and he kept saying to me in French, you're crazy. You're crazy. You can't go this way. Turn around. And he made me turn around. And I thought, no, I don't want to turn around. So as soon as he went into his little barn, I turned around again and went right back up. But I could not have done that alone. Again, I had to get help. And had there not been somebody there, I'd still be there right now. So I don't necessarily recommend it, but I wanted to experience the whole thing. So
and from my experience on that is I would agree with Mike, only because I'm a flatlander. I live in the Midwest in the United States. So, obviously there's not any mountains or hills that are of any size. So I wasn't necessarily willing to tackle that on my first Camino. And I would agree. I think it's hard enough walking it and riding it going uphill. I would think it'd be I saw people doing it, and it's granny gear all the way up, and just tedious. It's a hard if you want to really torture yourself.
You really call it granny gear? I'm just checking. I did it, you didn't.
The steepest section is a 20% gradient, 1 in 5. I mean, that's pretty horrendous in my book. But the other one I wouldn't cycle is the walker's route up to Cervera.
Yeah,
I mean, you've actually got a signposted cycle alternative on that one, which you must take. I mean, you do not try and go up the walker's route up to Cervera.
And for clarification, the first one that y'all said not to bike is, can you say the name again? We're trying to catch it in the chat.
Napoleon. It's the walker's route from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port up to Roncesvalles.
Thank you.
There's a perfectly good road that has very cautious zigzags and goes up the hill at a fairly gentle gradient, which most cyclists can manage, whereas the Napoleon is as steep as hell. And it's unsurfaced.
Agnes and Joe, you had a question? I think Agnes has a question.
Oh, is it Linda? Is that whether
Oh, yeah,
Go ahead, Linda.
I think the relationship between walkers and bikers would be much better and friendlier if there was some kind of an international symbol, which seems so easy, like to say Buen Camino or ring a bell or do something, because we've actually, especially on the Frances, the 2 times we walked, we've seen accidents, and some people had to go home. They just started, they got hurt, they had to go home. It was such a shame. And I'm just wondering why the biking community or some entity just didn't come up with something. It'd be so easy.
The problem isn't really the cyclists. The problem, you'd have to tell 70,000 walkers what they should do. I mean, most cyclists, in my experience anyway, if they're doing the Camino, are very understanding that they're on a mixed route. Ring your bell before you get there. If there's no sign that they've heard you, shout hola or something so they hear you. But what ideally they should do is keep to the right so you can pass on their left. And that's standard practice. But not many pedestrians, walkers know that. They look around in horror at your bike and they stand right in the middle, sort of frozen in your headlights, as it were, like rabbits. So it's often the fault, not the fault, wrong word. It's the fact that walkers don't understand what cyclists need, rather than cyclists don't understand what walkers need. The one exception you'll get are groups of Spaniards, particularly at weekends, out for a fast ride, bowling everything over in their way, young men usually. and they're not doing the whole Camino, and just might be out for a one-day ride. But they take no prisoners.
So I just like to add this perspective, because I think it's really important. And this came up last year when I did a similar type of presentation and worked with Sandy on it. And you know, there were a number of people that had brought up some bad experiences in terms of biking or walking, and in terms of the conflict between the two. And I think, speaking at now from a perspective of American Pilgrims, one of the takeaways was that we would try to get more involved and with the associations, given our networks and people that we know in Spain that work these with signage and other things, is that we would look to ways to improve that signage to mitigate or minimize the conflict, whatever you want to call it, between the two groups. And I think it speaks to education and also on signage. So we're more than, when we've actually had a few people attend some of the conferences in Spain, and we've brought it up as an issue in terms of how to resolve this in a better, and to be more safe, frankly, for everybody. It's a safety issue. It's a courtesy issue, but it's also a safety issue, because you want to be safe. And so, you know, I think the animosity that exists shouldn't be there. It should be just a mutual cooperation around how we resolve this, because we all share the road. And that's really kind of, you know, another one of Sandy's points about it being a multimodal path, and on everybody's awareness around that. And I think it speaks to Mike's comments around, you know, the fact that it's a perception issue on everybody's side, and it's really about being multimodal and also increasing the education for the groups like this, and also working in Spain with signage, right? So that's kind of a multi approach way to kind of resolve this, and it's going to be more important as it gets more popular. It's gotten more popular, so there's, you know, the chances for conflict and animosity to blow up are there. So, you know, I think as an organization, we're going to work hard to try to minimize that.
And there are a
With-
significant number of walkers who don't even realize that cyclists have a right to be on the path. In Britain, we have a thing called a bridleway, which is a standard of path, which is for cyclists, walkers, and horse riders. And it's named bridleway. But there are a lot of people walking the Camino who think it's just a footpath, and that cyclists are somehow breaking the law, doing something wrong. I mean, not huge numbers, but there are enough of those who, you know, they will shout at you and not deliberately obstruct you, but not get out of the way. And part of the education is to educate them in Spain that these are multimodal paths.
All right. With that, I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists. We are so grateful for your time, not just today, but I know all of y'all are involved in other ways with American Pilgrims in terms of different volunteer activities. I know you guys are active on our Facebook page, so I do want to give a shout out to you guys for all that you do to help support pilgrims around the world. Thank you everybody on this call also for your membership and your support for American Pilgrims. We will continue to email the latest national events and updates and things like that. We know we're coming into pilgrim season, which is an exciting time of year. And like Phil said, we think there are going to be more and more this year, more and more pilgrims walking this year. So we're excited to be part of your journey. Please check out our website for more information. If you need credentials, if you need connection to a local chapter, or any volunteer opportunities as well. So with that, I will say a very hearty Buen Camino to everybody, and thank you for joining us today.